This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
Whether you're ordering wings for the game, whipping up a 7-layer dip, or ordering pizza, there's something about football that makes you want to eat. And this football season, Uber Eats has the best deals on game day food. No matter what you're craving, from 2-for-1 pizza to buy one, get one wings, Uber Eats will be dropping new deals each week, all season long. Uber Eats, official on-demand delivery partner of the NFL. Order now. Terms and conditions apply. See app for details.
It is Monday, December the 16th, 2024. Where does the year go? Welcome back to Hang Up and Listen, Slate's sports podcast. Back with you again. I'm Alex Kirshner. I am a contributing writer here at Slate, and I am the co-host of the college football podcast Split Zone Duo. We have a good show on tap this week. Bill Belichick is now a college football coach. Would you believe that? The NBA Cup is now a trophy that at least some people in the NBA seem to care a lot about. And the Detroit Lions and Buffalo Bills, God help us, seem now to be the likeliest two teams to win the Super Bowl this year, or at least very close to it. They played over the weekend. These are strange times we live in. We'll talk about all of it. As usual, joining me this week is Lindsay Gibbs, the founder and proprietor of Power Plays, a newsletter that covers the biggest stories of the day in women's sports. Hello, Lindsay.
Hello. I'm here to plant a flag in the middle of your fields, so watch out.
There may be a law against that sometime soon.
Hopefully I don't get put in jail for it. A completely normal reaction.
Ohio legislation jokes to start it off this week.
Sometimes you just have to stand and marvel at the laboratory of democracy that is the Ohio State House. And there are constantly good ideas coming out of it. We also, of course, have Ben Lindbergh with us. Ben is a senior editor for The Ringer. He co-hosts the Effectively Wild podcast, which covers the world of baseball. Ben, how are you?
Pleased to report that, like LeBron, after his return from a foot injury, I feel, and I'm quoting King James here, pretty good. My feet feel fine, at least, which is not so important for podcasters because we can mostly sit down.
I mean, you've been at the top of the podcasting game for almost as long as LeBron's been at the top of the NBA.
Yeah, I'm uncomfortably close to 40 myself at this point, though not quite as close as LeBron.
Before we get into our more formal business this week, as always, we want to thank our Slate Plus members for making this show possible. One way of saying thanks is with a bonus episode, and this week we will talk about Travis Hunter winning the Heisman Trophy over the weekend and our evolving but still quite limited understanding of how to evaluate two-way stars, especially in sports that don't have a lot of them. There are plenty of them in basketball, not too many of them in football, or of course in baseball. You can hear that episode right now as long as you're a Slate Plus member. Subscribe by going to Apple Podcasts and clicking Try Free at the top of our show page, or you can visit slate.com/hangupplus to get access wherever you listen. You have heard by now, no doubt, that the University of North Carolina has a new football coach. You may have heard that he has won 8 Super Bowls. You may have heard that he grew up around the Navy football team, but has never coached a single day of college ball in his life. You may also have heard that he is taking over Lindsay Gibbs' favorite program. Lindsay, there is so much to go over about Bill Belichick's move to the ACC of all places. But we have to start with our resident Tar Heel. I'm going to give you 3 emotions here: excitement, curiosity, skepticism. Which is the closest to the front of your mind now that you've had a few days to process that Bill Belichick is going to be the head coach of your college football team?
The answer, Alex, is yes. That's the only answer I can say. I have all of those emotions are right at the forefront. I have to say, when the rumors first started, my feeling was horror. There's a few things that I just really hate. One is the Patriots and their dynasty. Really hated that. I hate 72-year-old men who date 24-year-olds. Really just hate that. And I hate people who really dress inappropriately for weather. I just what are you trying to prove in your shorts when it's snowing? I don't get it. I don't like it. Yeah, I'm a Tar Heel fan, ride or die. And I was like, there's no way this is happening. But I must say, as it has become somehow a reality, I think I'm intrigued more than anything. I mean, it's hard to express just how much of a Tar Heel fan I've been, yet how inconsequential UNC football has been to my life. It has just never really been a huge part of my fandom at all. And I think that having the program be relevant and being kind of the center of attention for a little while, there's a certain excitement that comes with that. And I think it's going to be a disaster? Honestly, I kind of do. I mean, we can talk about, how Bill Belichick deals with NIL and anytime, but I can't see this being good, but it's not going to be boring. And I think to me, UNC football has been just kind of a little boring. It's been an afterthought in my world for so long that this makes it certainly more interesting. Certainly a lot of my sports writer friends are, having more jobs now and having more opportunities to write. So you know what? Bring it on.
Yeah, I guess the question really, and I'll refrain from making any youth movement jokes about Belichick's personal life, though I will make the joke that this is a youth movement for UNC because he is younger than Mac Brown. But the question really is just, I guess, did he want this? Or was he forced to settle for this? At least that's the question that's foremost in my mind. I know that this is pitched as sort of a homecoming and that his dad was an assistant coach there and that we've all now seen a photo of tiny tot Bill Belichick, 3-year-old, on the stands in the bleachers attending a game, and he somehow looks almost exactly the same other than not having a hoodie.
His first words were beat Duke. That's a completely true story and an absolutely true anecdote.
Right. But does that mean that this was his lifelong dream and it was going to be full circle and that this was what he always wanted to do? Or was it that the right NFL offer, or any NFL offer, frankly, was not there for him, or that it wasn't there for him under the terms that he was accustomed to with the Patriots, where he was this kind of anachronistic total control figure, the last of the dual head coach GMs by the time he was done there, a different kind of two-way figure than Travis Hunter, whom we'll be discussing in our bonus segment, but just as much out of time, essentially. And given that he wanted that type of control and that it's hard to have that in the NFL these days, maybe college was attractive to him because, of course, he can be the big man on campus there. And there were reports about stipulations and conditions in a 400-page organizational Bible that defined every little iota of the program as it would function under him, which he denied. But it does seem fairly Belichickian for him to have come in and said, yes, I'm going to be running the show in the way that I'm accustomed to here. And so maybe that was appealing. Although then again, I don't know that college sports actually offer the capacity for control that Belichick had in the NFL and with the Patriots. Well, he'll be pitching himself as, okay, this will be a college to pro pipeline, and who's better positioned to make that case. But he's not necessarily someone now who can just lay back and look for deals, not breaking the bank. In college sports these days, you can't count on drafting and developing and building from within and finding bargains. You have to go out there and spend. And it does sound like UNC is going to let him do that to an extent, but maybe it'll be a bit of a rude awakening for him and his capacity to actually build a sustainable powerhouse in the NIL era.
Yes, North Carolina has told a few reporters, including Richard Johnson of CBS Sports, who is my co-host on Split Zone Duo, that they're going to up their spending on player compensation to about $20 million next year. They have not said if that just means that they are going to spend up to a salary cap that is going to be about $20 million under a new player payment settlement that's going to likely go into effect next year. Because a lot of schools are going to do that. A lot of schools are going to be paying about $20 million to their athletes. Or if they're talking about something on top of that, which some of the big dogs are probably going to do as we move into this new era of a college sports economy. But I think either way, Ben, you're onto something that it's not likely that North Carolina is suddenly going to be the heaviest hitter in the world of paying players. I mean, Lindsay, you're laughing because you know North Carolina football and you know the University of North Carolina. You're not going to spend what Alabama and Ohio State and Oregon and Texas A&M and you know the types spend on players. It's not going to happen. And maybe you get some players who give a little discount to go play for Bill Belichick, but I'm going to have to see that. I'm going to have to see that before I believe that that's actually happening. And I'm a bit skeptical that it ever would.
It's just so ridiculous. I mean, I think about Deion Sanders, and obviously Deion Sanders and Bill Belichick are not at all similar. But I think that's almost the closest comp where you're hoping it's the head coach and the reputation of the head coach that is going to be the one thing that is able to set your football program apart, even though this head coach has no relevant college coaching experience. But Deion has, as we've discussed on this show, the personality, the showmanship, his life is a Netflix documentary. He lives his life in theatrics. And Bill Belichick just grumbles at reporters and huffs away and, just recently joined Instagram. And I'm pretty sure he's not the one running that account. And so just to think about, I know this mainly from the women's basketball world, but talking to women's basketball head coaches in college over the past few years, the amount of changes they've had to make to be more relatable, to help them with recruiting, to reach out to and connect with kids, and to kind of embrace this modern world that we live in, it's extreme. And you're seeing, of course, a lot of coaches retire, get out of the game, or in the women's basketball world now, you're actually seeing a rare thing, which is coaches going from college to the WNBA because that lifestyle is so much better. And it's just hard to imagine Belichick really, truly embracing the performance aspect that is required of a college head coach.
Yeah, I guess you could say that maybe this program is poised to improve. Neil Payne on his Substack wrote that UNC has always struck him as a sleeping football giant. Emphasis on the sleeping, I suppose, but it is a successful sports school. It's obviously one of the most successful college basketball schools, and just it's underperformed its population and its overall caliber as a sports school. And so maybe what they need is someone like Bill Belichick to come in and give them a recruiting edge, which I do think will be real, even in the era of the transfer portal and it being difficult to hold on to players. It's a pretty good pitch, play for Bill Belichick, and he's stressing that idea of, hey, I can prepare you for the NFL and I can basically get you polished and ready to get drafted and excel at that level, and he can make that case pretty convincingly. Now, will he be able to connect with college-age players? Again, age gaps jokes aside, will he rub them the wrong way? Will they kind of like his ornery nature and say, hey, 6 Super Bowls, I will learn at his knee and put up with the rest? Or will that prove to be too great a gap for him to actually connect with these players and mold these young men, as college coaches like to say that they do? And I also wonder what this means for his legacy. Obviously, it depends whether this is a success or a disaster, but that's something that surprised a lot of people. Hey, he's chasing Don Shula for the all-time NFL head coach wins record. Isn't that something that would be important to him? The clock is ticking. Again, maybe it's just that the right job or any job wasn't out there for him. But Alex, I wonder what we have learned from the history of NFL coaches going to college and vice versa. If that doesn't go well, can it tarnish your legacy, or is it more just that if it does go well, it can burnish it? would it really improve our perception of Bill Belichick, who's already widely regarded as a football genius and maybe the greatest coach of all time, if he's able to turn this program into a success?
I don't think this is going to be in the first couple of sentences of his Wikipedia page long term.
Yeah.
I do think it's possible that it becomes a part of Bill Belichick's legacy that is remembered as more than a footnote. I mean, the most successful cases of this obviously are remembered that way. Pete Carroll is probably mostly remembered as the Seahawks coach, but is also definitely remembered for coaching some of the best teams of the century at USC. Jim Harbaugh, probably foremostly, is going to be remembered as the guy who saved Michigan and then also kind of left Michigan a bit high and dry as he went back to the NFL. It can happen. It can be successful. It can also be disastrous. There are numerous cases of it being a complete disaster as you just go down your little list of names and you find your Nick Saban's at the top going college, NFL, college, your Steve Spurrier's going to the NFL and finding it not working out. You can also find like tons and tons of NFL guys who did brief stops in college, or even just high level college guys who made smaller college stops later in their career as a second act, and it didn't go great. So I think if you're motivated to find the case that Bill Belichick can adapt and do it, you can find that case. It's not impossible to me. I think he knows more. He forgets more about football in a morning than most people will know in a lifetime, including a lot of coaches. But what's actually really interesting to me about this, insofar as finding ways for this to maybe be a success at North Carolina, is the idea of Bill Belichick being someone that North Carolina football people rally around. Lindsay, how much money you donated to UNC's NIL collective in the last couple years? Just give me a number.
I'll have to get back to you on that one. I got to look through my accounting. No, I mean, nobody. That's what I'm most curious about. First of all, we, the millennials among us, like we grew up with Belichick. We saw Belichick create and sustain this dynasty. And I'm wondering, does he have the same cachet with like 14, 15, 16-year-olds as he does with the reporters in the media generation? Do they even care?
I think that they might not.
Yeah.
These kids were very young when Bill was winning big with Tom Brady. But what I do think these players care about is the dollar. Mm-hmm. I think we are moving to a world where this is a top 2 consideration, maybe certainly top 3: money, coaches, campus. If you could kind of group them into 3 things that go into a recruiting pitch. And I do think that, Lindsay, you might probably not you directly, because you don't seem like the NIL donor type to me. Most in sports media do not.
Well, yeah.
But I do think there is a case. There's a case where Bill Belichick is a marshaller of resources for North Carolina. And North Carolina, I think you are going to get a lot more fundraising emails. And I think your friends will get them too. And I think that there will be more people who will probably give money to North Carolina's athletic and player payment fundraising efforts than there have been previously, because you can point and you can say, look, we got Bill Belichick here. It's time to go all in. Arguably, this matters less now because the schools are going to be able to pay players directly out of their conference revenue and any other revenue that comes into their athletics department. But this has happened many times in college sports history where someone takes a job and, maybe they don't do amazingly on the field, but they sort of get the football program or the basketball program to grow up financially. I think this is absolutely what Arkansas was trying to do when they hired John Calipari from Kentucky. He's there right now. Do I think that John Calipari is going to win a national championship at Arkansas? Probably not. But do I think that John Calipari going to Arkansas resulted in the big whale donors there and also some of the common fans giving a lot more money to Arkansas and that changing the way that Arkansas can operate for the long term? Yeah, I think that's on the table with North Carolina. You sure we can't hit you up for maybe just a mere 100,000?
Yeah. This sports reporting, independent sports reporting is raking in the money these days. So I'm sure I'll be
as a compliment.
I'm sure I'll be at the top of the list. But
when I say you're not the type who would donate to an NIL collective, to be clear, it's a compliment. Okay. I'm not either. I got better causes. I got way better causes to give my money to. But not everyone thinks that way.
Well, I just want to, speaking of, numbers, Brendan Marks of The Athletic, who's one of the great sports reporters here in North Carolina, and I'm sure we'll be doing a lot more football reporting nowadays than he had originally planned. But, he reported that per the university's financial statements, they've spent $63.9 million on football projects since 2018, which is a 104% increase. So they've been spending money on football, but in that time, their revenue only grew 50%. So the revenue is not nearly in pace with the spending, and that obviously has to change. So I think a big swing like this was necessary. I'm curious if it's going to ignite the fans and, get the support of people. But I want to go back also to something that Ben was mentioning, which is that how long is this going to last? His buyout is $10 million, but that's only until June 1st, 2025, when his buyout goes to just $1 million. And it leaked, I'm sure, by Belichick himself that he did reach out to the New York Jets about their coaching opportunity, which is, of course, something that you would think would be unfathomable given their history. But he has 15 wins to get the all-time wins record in the NFL. He wants that. His ego has taken a hit because NFL teams don't like him anymore, and they're saying he's outdated. He's going to be bought into this for at least 1 year because he's trying to rebuild his reputation and kind of kick it. And I mean, the ACC, I think, is a conference that you want to go into if you're trying to make a quick turnaround in the college football world. It's not that competitive. There is a way, but there's a really good chance this lasts 1 year, and that's it. And then is UNC, are we just being used? Is it just embarrassment? Where does that leave the program?
Yeah, if SMU can do it, so can you. But I think maybe he will surprise us again, because he surprised us in any number of ways over the past year. And one way in which he surprised us was by being pretty entertaining on TV, which you could say about Nick Saban to an even greater extent. But Bill Belichick, who would have expected that the gruff guy at the press conferences would have actually been pretty garrulous when he wanted to be. And maybe if those kids don't appreciate him for what he did on the sidelines years ago, maybe they know him from the Manning cast or the Pat McAfee show, which he's apparently going to continue to appear on. So he does seem to have that ability to relate to people when he wants to and turn on the charm by Belichick standards. So maybe that will help him here. And he does have a lot to prove, which sounds preposterous to say about someone with his resume, but he did not leave on top. He left the Patriots more or less in shambles, and with people starting to question, was it Brady all along? Was Belichick just along for the ride? Which had to rankle. So if he's now in a position of rehabilitating his image and showing that he can still do it at this age, then if the right offer does come along, I would think he'd be receptive to that. Now, he said, of course, I didn't come here to leave, and I'm sure that's true on some level, but where are we putting the odds of him serving out his full 5-year term here?
Believe the contract number, believe the buyout figure that Lindsay cited over the coach saying he didn't come here to leave. Oldest lesson in college football coaching is that if you say one thing and your contract says another thing, the contract speaks the truth.
Yes.
You don't.
It's true. Well, we didn't come to today's Hang Up and Listen to leave, so we will keep podcasting.
We absolutely will. Up next, the NBA set out before last season to create a midseason prize worth caring about. And as the second race for the NBA Cup wraps up, let us ask, how's it going? This episode is brought to you by Public.com. Did you know you can lock in a 6% or higher yield with a bond account at Public.com? The Federal Reserve recently announced rate cuts, and there could be more rate cuts in 2025. That's good news if you're looking to buy a home, but it might not be so good for the interest you earn on your cash. So if you want to lock in a 6% or higher yield with a diversified portfolio of high yield and investment grade bonds, check out Public.com. It only takes a couple of minutes to sign up. And once you lock in your yield, you can earn regular interest payments even as rates decline. Lock in a 6% or higher yield with a bond account at public.com/hangup. But remember, your yield is not locked in until you invest. Brought to you by Public Investing, member FINRA plus SIPC. As of September 26, 2024, the average annualized yield to worst across the bond account is greater than 6%. Yield to worst is not guaranteed. Not an investment recommendation. All investing involves risk. Visit public.com/disclosure/bond-account for more info.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today? Smart choice. Progressive loves to help people make smart choices. And that's why they offer a tool called Auto Quote Explorer that allows you to compare your Progressive car insurance quote with rates from other companies. So you can save time on the research and can enjoy savings when you choose the best rate for you. Give it a try after this episode at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states and situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
Welcome back to Hang Up and Listen. Alex Kirshner still here with Ben Lindbergh and Lindsay Gibbs. I always like the FA Cup, the club competition that draws teams from every level of the English soccer system and unfolds during the Premier League season. The FA Cup has a lot of history, and it matters because people care about it, not just fans of the lower division teams that might get to host a giant like Tottenham and make a great scene out of it, but even fans of the big teams themselves and their players too. It's a thing people care about advancing in, if not always quite as much as winning the league. The NBA seems to have liked the FA Cup also, and last season it instituted the NBA Cup, its own in-season tournament with pool play and then single elimination knockout rounds. Last year the Lakers won it and LeBron James was the MVP. This year's wraps up this Tuesday night in Las Vegas, and we will not tell you the outcome yet because we are not from the future and don't know when you are listening to this, but it will be the Milwaukee Bucks or the Oklahoma City Thunder. Good matchup, maybe telling of these teams putting their best foot forward in this tournament. But we want to talk about the NBA Cup as a competition, as something the NBA has created to keep more people engaged during a regular season that is very long. There are things the NBA Cup doesn't have. It doesn't have that history that we talked about with the FA Cup. It doesn't require the Lakers to play a fifth division sort of semi-pro basketball team that operates out of a glorified rec center in order to advance. But it does seem to be something players care about, and they should, with a champions bonus for the winners that was $500,000 per player last year. It does seem to be something that has made for lively NBA arenas with those funny painted courts signifying cup games. And it's a thing to sell for the NBA, with Emirates Airlines owning the naming rights this year. Ben, if you're not charmed by that naming rights deal, I can't imagine what would woo you over. Are you compelled by what the NBA has put together here?
Not particularly, no. And congrats in advance to either the Bucks or the Thunder. May your NBA Cup runneth over. But I can't say I'm compelled by it. I'm also not upset about it. I am less confused by the concept and the format than I was last season, so that's progress. But you mentioned the FA Cup, and I think that makes for an instructive comparison, because the FA Cup is 150 years old, more. The FA Cup theoretically pits teams against each other that wouldn't otherwise be competing directly. It spans a lot of leagues. There is money at stake. You can win up to 2 million euros, which is a pittance for the top teams, but pretty significant sum for lower level clubs. You also get something more than money. You qualify for the UEFA Europa League and the FA Community Shield. So you can change the name of the NBA Cup from the end season tournament, but that doesn't mean that it is FA Cup-ish. You can't immediately give it the history and tradition that the FA Cup has. And you aren't really providing any stakes beyond the money. You're also not really giving us many unusual matchups. Obviously, the vast majority of the NBA Cup games are just regular season games that are double counted. And we don't even get cross-conference matchups until pretty late in the game. So it's sort of dressing up essentially the regular season, as I said, and trying to turn it into something, trying to make fetch happen here. And maybe 150 years from now, Hang Up and Listen hosts will be looking back and marveling at the grand tradition of the NBA Cup, established back in the early 2020s, the venerable tradition. But right now, we're not there, and it still seems somewhat artificial. And, I guess I would say that there are two standards we can evaluate it by. The first is, has the NBA Cup prevented the regular season doldrums, made everyone stop talking about TV ratings? No. The second standard, the lower standard, is it better than not having an NBA Cup? And to that, I suppose I'd say probably, unless you're someone who really hates how the courts look.
I love everything about the NBA Cup. I think I'm like an NBA Cup stan, and it's not because it's perfect or it is like the FA Cup or it means everything. It's just something different, and it does for me all the things that I needed it to do. I don't need it to be a playoffs. I don't need it to mean that much. I don't need it to be anxiety inducing in any way. I need it to give the beginning of the NBA season, which has so many teams playing so many games, and you have no idea who is good and who is not. I need that part of the season to have a little bit of structure to help me get engaged in the NBA. Because, once the Christmas games come and you've got trade season and the trade deadline, and then you've got All-Star and then the ramp up to the playoffs, all of that, there are narratives that are easy to follow. But I always have had a hard time paying any attention to the NBA during this part of the season. So I appreciate that it does give a little bit of focus. There's a few games where it feels like on social media, everyone is kind of watching and paying attention, which does not happen often in the NBA early in this season. And it just kind of breaks things up. Like the Houston Rockets and the Oklahoma City Thunder played the semifinal. And those are two teams that I barely ever watch. And I listen to a lot of NBA podcasts, so I certainly hear about them. But I don't often have time to just sit down and kind of hone in on their games because they're not on national TV that much. And, in Houston's case, have not been that good recently at all. So I really liked that I had this chance to, learn more about these teams. It forces the national media to focus on teams that it normally completely ignores. Like, wake up. There's more than just LeBron James and Steph Curry in this league. No offense. Love them both. And I think in that way, it's really effective. I think last year it gave the Indiana Pacers a lot of attention early in the season that set up the team and reporters well for the run they eventually made in the playoffs. And I think similarly this year with the Oklahoma City Thunder, it's helping bring that team more into the national consciousness. And, also, giving us a little beat to appreciate Giannis Antetokounmpo. Like, love that. That's wonderful. And Trae Young, getting on a big stage again. Haven't seen Trae Young. I just think there's so much that gets lost in the NBA regular season and even in the NBA, first round of playoffs, which are just chaotic. So I like it. And I also love the crazy courts. I want them to go even crazier.
Lindsay, I think you make a good point about the slog of the early NBA regular season. And this, to me, might be the sport that most needed something like this. It's not the longest regular season. Obviously, that's baseball. But I think baseball fans see it as sort of an exciting calling to be watching games in April and May.
We revel in the slog.
Exactly. And I think baseball fans see the regular season and its length as sort of the true measure of a team. And obviously the World Series is great, but everyone talks and is right about how random the MLB postseason is. Whereas the NBA, I think, is maybe the most playoff-ified sport that we have, just in terms of what seems important. Nobody really cares about, for the purposes of LeBron James' legacy, how he's playing in December. It just doesn't really affect the way that anyone's going to remember anybody. And so I get why the NBA, sponsorship rights aside, wanted to do something to create meaning. I mean, this is the sport of load management and of DNP CDs early on in the season. And at some point your product in the regular season gets so diluted that it just becomes harder to grab new fans and to keep the ones you have. And so I get why they tried something like this, and it seems like it's working fine, even though I'm kind of with Ben that I don't sit down and think, I'm honored to be watching the NBA Cup. I'll remember where I was.
But I don't think you need to. I don't think that's the point of it. I think, you're not trying to make this the finals. You're trying to maybe increase interest by 15 to 20%. And that's a huge win, right? That makes a difference. I think you're kind of trying to move the needle at the margins. At least maybe I just had really low expectations for what this is. And I'm not saying it's perfect at all. But yeah, I don't know. I'm very positive about it for whatever reason.
Yeah, if the baseline is just no NBA Cup, then I think it's probably an improvement in terms of excitement on that. So if you do set your sights that low, I don't know that the NBA itself did, but if you can, then sure, it's better than the alternative. I like the courts too. I like that you can instantly see that you're dealing with an NBA Cup game. Again, you kind of need the court, the visual signifier of that, because otherwise there wouldn't actually be a difference, which is maybe kind of telling. But still, it's a nice instant clue that, okay, this is what we're watching, and this is at least ostensibly a little bit different. I wonder whether this is something that will gain momentum over time or lose it. Is it that each year that this is played, there will be a little more history and we'll get more psyched for it? Or is there still some novelty value in it that will just wear off even more over time, and Alex and I will care even less several seasons into this practice?
I think it largely depends on the players. We've talked on the show before about how things get meaning because the players care about them at a fundamental level in all sports. If NFL players talked all year about how much they don't really care about the Super Bowl and the real thing is winning the AFC Championship and the NFC Championship, then the Super Bowl would not be that big a deal. And I think the same thing filters down to something like this. Last year, I think part of the reason why it was such a successful debut was that LeBron James at least gave a very strong impression that he cared. And he played really well in these games, and he was the MVP of the NBA Cup. If LeBron James was sitting on the bench and using these games for load management and not appearing to be very engaged, then people would care less, because we care about what they care about. And that's where we find the signal of how important things are. So I think it's really up to the NBA's players, how successful this is going to be in the long run.
And I think, the Warriors lost in heartbreaking fashion to the Rockets in the quarterfinals. The quarterfinals are not in Vegas. They're on the highest seeds home court. And I will say, the whole round robin thing in the middle of the season, that could be clarified a little bit. That gets a little confusing. I'm not good at following the standings leading up to it until it becomes these single elimination games. But the Warriors lost in the last second, and both Steve Kerr and Draymond Green said, that this game did mean more. And Draymond Green said, I think it meant more because we were actually playing for something. Now, does Draymond Green think this means as much as the finals? Does he think this impacts his legacy? No. But it's a little something extra even for the players to dial in. And I do think that's evident. And the players, we should say, they get about $500,000 each if they win it all, which obviously to the Draymond Greens, to the LeBron James isn't that much, but it's not nothing to them. And also all the players get it. So your bottom of the bench players who are on maybe $1 million salary also get that $500,000. And I know some Knicks players talked about that being motivating for them, for wanting to get that money to their teammates. So I do think the cash prize helps. I do think Vegas, and I'm sure they're treated really well in Vegas, and I'm sure it helps kind of break up the season a little bit for those players. And so I do think we're seeing players start to buy in. But it could just become, maybe I do like it because of the novelty. I mean, I'm very easy to manipulate when it comes to things like this. So that's certainly possible.
Yeah, it hasn't seemed to stop the relentless conversation about NBA ratings, which is a pretty tiresome one, but just continues to surface. And is it the injuries? Is it that there are too many games? Is it that there are too many three-pointers? At least they're trying to head off those complaints and that doom-mongering at the pass by trying to do something about it here, and also trying to limit the load management to an extent, but again, hasn't really silenced those concerns. And Alex, you mentioned that whether the players care or appear to care about these things, kind of we take our cues from them to some extent. You could certainly point to the All-Star game where clearly the players don't care, and now neither do we. And there are a lot of reasons for that. But do you then think, okay, then let's make them care by adding extra stakes here? And that could be a mistake. That could be a Bud Selig, this time it counts sort of initiative. And everyone says, no, this is better as an exhibition when it doesn't count. But do you think, okay, maybe there will be earlier eliminations, or there will be some sort of competitive stakes that extend beyond the NBA Cup? My boss, Bill Simmons, for one, I believe, raised the idea that maybe you win the NBA Cup, you can't be lower than the 6th playoff spot. You don't have to play into the playoffs if you're in that position. So something like that. Or for someone who's anti-NBA Cup, they might say, you know what, I don't hate it just because it doesn't matter that much ultimately, but if you start actually making it have competitive implications, then I'll like it even less.
I think as you were explaining this, as you were sort of framing the question, I had the exact same thought that Bill Simmons does, that you just described to us. I think that if you guarantee some sort of NBA playoffs positioning to the teams that make it to the final of the NBA Cup or win the NBA Cup, I do think that is an extra thing that makes sense. And really, why not? I mean, the NBA has already noted for us almost explicitly with its end of season tournament that it doesn't really care whether you are the 7th or the 8th or the 9th or the 10th best team in a conference. Like, it wants to, that whole play-in tournament exists to create stakes, not because the NBA thinks there's a big difference between the 7th best team and the 10th best team. And if you're 7th, how dare you be forced to play your way in? It strikes me that this would be justifiable on kind of the same grounds. Just that, you know, if you say that nobody can be lower than 6th or 7th in a conference because they win the NBA Cup, then great, you've just made the NBA Cup matter more. And I mean, you're probably not really futzing too much with the competitive integrity of the NBA playoffs, because I'm not seeing a lot of 6 or 7 seeds making runs to the NBA finals.
Should we get predictions? Bucks versus Thunder, 2 of the MVP candidates. That's exciting. Like, they're, Shea and Giannis are both MVP candidates, so they're getting on the stage, getting a showcase. I think the Thunder are going to do it.
I hope so. The Thunder have not gotten to the mountaintop in the NBA Finals. They have had a somewhat tortured history, but they're really obviously on the come up now and have been for the last couple of years. Yeah, let's do it. Let's give the Oklahoma City Thunder fans something to be excited about. They had a tough football season too, whether they're Oklahoma or Oklahoma State fans. So they deserve a bit of happiness.
Yeah, and if they pull it off, we can't quite call that the mountaintop either. That's not quite the summit, but maybe it's better than base camp. It's somewhere in between. And again, the highs have been high. The good games have been good. So maybe this will be another.
And Doc Rivers in a championship scenario, I wouldn't put my money on it.
You know, it's funny. While we're talking about teams that have not quite reached the mountaintop, up next, 2 of the most sad sack franchises in NFL history have been building toward it for a while, but now they are really on the verge of a new day. They also played on Sunday. Let's talk about the Lions and the Bills. Stay with us. Everyone loves a deal, but no one wants to jump through hoops just to save a few bucks. Turns out it really is easy to get wireless for $15 a month with the purchase of a 3-month Mint Mobile plan. Even Slate's president, Charlie Kammerer, is using Mint Mobile, and he thinks the Mint Mobile deal is amazing. He's on the $15 a month deal and is getting unlimited talk and text over their 5G network at literally a fraction of what he was paying with someone else. They let him use his existing phone, and he didn't even have to change his number. He says more people should be trying this out. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. You can use your own phone with any plan and bring your phone number along with all your contacts. Right now, all 3-month plans are $15 a month, including the unlimited plan. To get started, go to mintmobile.com/hangup. To get this new customer offer and your new 3-month premium wireless plan for just $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/hangup. That's mintmobile.com/hangup. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/hangup. $45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speeds slower above 40 gigabytes on an unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details. There are more than 1.5 million nonprofit organizations in the United States and millions more around the world. How do you know which ones can make the biggest impact with your donation? GiveWell was founded to help donors with that exact question. They pore over independent studies and charity data to help donors direct their funds to evidence-backed organizations that are saving and improving lives. GiveWell has now spent over 17 years researching charitable organizations and only directs funding to a few of the highest impact opportunities they've found. Over 100,000 donors have used GiveWell to donate more than $2 billion. Rigorous evidence suggests that these donations will save over 200,000 lives and improve the lives of millions more. GiveWell wants as many donors as possible to make informed decisions about high-impact giving. You can find all of their research and recommendations on their site for free. You can make tax-deductible donations to their recommended funds or charities, and GiveWell doesn't take a cut. If you've never used GiveWell to donate, you can have your donation matched up to $100 before the end of the year, or as long as matching funds last. To claim your match, go to givewell.org and pick podcast and enter Hang Up and Listen at checkout. Make sure they know that you heard about GiveWell from Hang Up and Listen to get your donation matched. Again, that's givewell.org to donate or find out more. Still here with my friends Lindsay Gibbs and Ben Lindbergh. I'm Alex Kirshner on Hang Up and Listen. The Detroit Lions hosted the Buffalo Bills yesterday in a game that definitely did not feel very Lions-Bills. CBS brought its pregame show on site to Detroit. Most seem to agree that this one pitted the best team in the NFC against the best team in the AFC. Two of the most historically tortured franchises in pro football have turned it around really over the last few years. But this year, the Chiefs look vulnerable in the AFC where the Bills are. The Lions certainly look better than anyone except arguably the Eagles in the NFC. The 49ers, who dispatched the Lions in the NFC Championship last year, have fallen off pretty hard. So in this round between these two teams, the Bills won a 48-42 barn burner in the Lions' house. Josh Allen emerged looking like the best player in the world, and the Bills look like they really should get over the hump this year. I think they're the best team in the AFC. Meanwhile, the Lions still are in a great position to get a first-round bye in the NFC and to make a deep playoff run themselves. These are the two betting favorites to the extent that you care about that to win the Super Bowl. Bills first, then Lions. Lindsay, have you seen enough to believe that we might see a sequel to Bills Lions played in a couple of months under all of the lights?
I gotta say, not to be a downer, but a little worried about both defenses. There was absolutely zero obstacles put in front of these high-powered offenses. But yeah, I think you can see it. Do I think it's a given? No, especially given the history. But right now, especially the Bills, Josh Allen looks like he is, I think, the best player in the game. And they probably won't have the number 1 seed in the AFC. They'll probably have to go on the road to Kansas City, but Kansas City has not looked unstoppable at all during the regular season. Patrick Mahomes tweaked his ankle this weekend. It doesn't seem too serious, but it is something to keep an eye on, although Patrick Mahomes on a gimpy ankle in the postseason has been a good thing for the Chiefs in recent years. But it's great. I mean, there's something fun about watching franchises try and fight their past demons and make it all the way to the top. And there are a few that have as many demons as both of these teams. So do I think it's also interesting to me, like, the Chiefs could be spoilers and the Eagles, right, could be spoilers as well. Neither one of those teams have looked great, but have had some really promising moments. And the Eagles, especially on defense, which, as we mentioned, is not the forte right now of the Bills or the Lions, due primarily to injuries for both teams. But I'm really excited to see how this all plays out, because I think the narrative of the proven successful teams who are not playing up to their potential versus kind of the clearly more talented but haunted teams trying to make it to the top, that's compelling stuff.
Yeah, it reminds me of the utopian prophecy of the lions and the lambs laying together. And here we have the Lions and the Bills playing together. And it is kind of nice to think of that happening and guaranteeing that at least one of them will succeed and will reach the aforementioned mountaintop. I think that was Isaiah who had that prophecy. The prophet, not one of the many NFL Isaiahs who have played for the Lions or the Bills. But it's not just that they're meeting up, but also that they're the class of the league, that you have the Bills with the presumptive MVP at this point. You have the Lions, who have just been running roughshod over the league for the most part until they ran into the Bills on Sunday. This is a compelling matchup, in addition to the fact that you have the lovable losers / sad sacks / tortured franchises. And it would be great to guarantee that one of these fan bases would be happy. I was thinking about whether I like the idea of the World Series preview or the finals preview or the Super Bowl preview, or whether I prefer to go into it cold, not having recently seen that matchup. And I think I come down on the former. I think even though it spoils the element of surprise a little bit, in that if these two teams do match up just a couple months down the road, their recent matchup will be fresh in my mind. I think that actually adds to the intrigue. There's something to be said for teams that just haven't seen each other and you have no idea how they will match up and how they will try to counter each other. But I do think it's actually even better to have some recent tape to grind and to see the adjustments that they make and to have some sort of built-in rivalry there.
I agree with you, Ben. Football is a moves and counter moves game, and to see a little bit of prelude and get a sense of how the teams adjust to each other, I think would only enrich it if we were to see these guys play in the Super Bowl. I'm particularly impressed this year with Josh Allen. I think what he's doing right now, even by the standards of the NFL's era of dominant young quarterbacks, is really something. Because remember, the Bills, before this season, traded his best wide receiver, Stephon Diggs, to the Houston Texans, and really decided coming into this year, especially on offense, and Lindsay, you just talked about their problems on defense, they're well documented, that this is all going to be on Josh's shoulders this year. And what's he done? He's teamed up with a 2022 fifth-round pick, Khalil Shakir out of Boise State, who's become the Bills' best receiver. Yesterday, he was combining with Ty Johnson, a journeyman late-round running back who's been around the league for a while, for some of the best plays in that game. And it just feels like Josh Allen is doing a degree of the thing that Patrick Mahomes has always done with the Chiefs' weird crew of wide receivers, but at least then Mahomes has always had a prime Travis Kelce. Josh Allen has really, really put this on himself this year with a supporting cast offensively that nobody would have looked at before the year and said, wow, what a lightning crew of playmakers he's got around him. And I love when there is one guy trying to lift a franchise to heights that it has never reached and looks like he might be successful in doing it.
I think it's we've talked about the offenses, but just for some stats, you come to me when you want stats, but the Bills had 559 yards of offense in the game yesterday. Allen had 362 passing yards with 2 touchdowns and 68 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns rushing. He has, in the past 2 games, he has 5 passing and 5 rushing touchdowns. Of course, they played that ridiculous high-octane game, which they lost against the Rams just last week. And then for Detroit, Jared Goff looked great. Unfortunately, it all kind of was won and lost in the beginning when the Lions didn't have success on their first couple of drives and the Bills scored touchdowns on both of their first drives. But Goff became the only player since 1950 to lose a game in which he finished with 400-plus passing yards, 5-plus passing touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. Previously, quarterbacks who achieved those numbers were perfect 16-0. And another nugget for the Bills, they've scored 30-plus points in 8 consecutive games, which is tied for an NFL record. So this is just lights out. And it's historically, you think of these teams as defensive in the trenches teams. So not only is kind of their winning a little, unprecedented and unlikely, but their entire identities as a team is unlikely. And I must say our earlier segments in the football season about quarterbacks and offenses struggling have not aged great.
No, the empire has struck back over the latter part of the season. The empire being the quarterback lobby.
Yeah,
right. And look, there are other good teams out there, but the conversation about the Chiefs all season has been basically that they are the worst team ever to have whatever their record is through that week, right? And that's without counting Mahomes' recent injury. It's just that they've won a bunch of squeakers and improbable close ones and comebacks. And are you going to count them out and say that they can't do that again in a playoff game in the Super Bowl? No, of course not. But if you're going to go by the underlying numbers, then it's tough to top the Lions. And what a strange sentence that is to say. And I guess this brings up the perennial conversation when fans try to compete to elevate their own suffering and to suggest that they deserve it the most because they've been through the worst. And one of the constant refrains there is, well, is it better to have been consistently terrible so that you never even have a shot, or to be good enough that you had many chances and you fumbled them all, sometimes literally? Just, is it better to have played and lost or never to have played at all? And that's the contrast between these two teams, where you have the Lions, never made a Super Bowl, and you have the Bills, of course, who notoriously made and lost 4 in a row. So they haven't made it in, 30 years either. So it's not as if they've had a lot of recent runs there, but who in your mind deserves it more? Who has had the greater suffering? And so in the interest of balancing the cosmic karmic scales here, would emerge from a rematch victorious?
Well, I only say Bills fans have suffered more because they are still in an outdoor stadium, though that will change soon. So Bills fans have certainly sat through worse.
Yeah.
Just climate-wise.
True.
In order to get to this point. Oh, otherwise, though, it's close. I might just take that as the tiebreaker.
I think it's Lions, absolutely. I mean, I feel like I do have some insight into what it's for pitiful franchises. And
you are qualified.
Yeah,
no
I'm
question.
qualified. But the Panthers have been to 2 Super Bowls, and the losses, heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking. But those seasons are 2 of my best memories as a sports fan. I remember all the ups and downs of those individual seasons. And so I have so many great memories from those Super Bowl runs, even though they ended in heartbreak, that I absolutely think it's worse to never have made it there at all. But before we head out, the most pressing question of the day: did you agree with the onside kick with 12 minutes left? Detroit cut Buffalo's lead to 38-28, and they decided with 12 minutes left to attempt an onside kick. The Bills recovered and returned it to Detroit's 5-yard line, and it took one more play for Josh Allen to make it 45-28. Right call or wrong call? Put on your Stephen A. Smith hats.
Wrong call, but I love the way Dan Campbell does business, the coach of the Lions.
Yeah, I think I'm with you. I value the aggressiveness. Sometimes you can get a little over-aggressive, but it's probably better than the opposite extreme.
It was a terrible, terrible call, but I would be furious if I were a Lions fan, but...
Okay. You sounded more like Stephen A. than Alex and I did.
Well,
Preposterous.
This holiday season, don't forget your number one fan, you. So what's a gift you could use? Maybe go to more home games, or even travel to some away games while rocking a new away team jersey. Well, here's something for you. Discover automatically doubles all the cash back you've earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cashback Match. With Discover, you could turn $150 cash back into $300. That'll help with the swanky away jersey. It pays to Discover. See terms at discover.com/creditcard. I am excited because I am told that we've got a great Afterball this week. But Lindsay, it is your obligation to name Ben Lindbergh's Afterball on this episode.
All right. So we've talked about the news of Bill Belichick's hire and how it's reverberated throughout the sports world. And many have asked if UNC is ready to become a football school instead of a basketball school. But the truth is, UNC is neither. As Dean Smith said in '97, this is a women's soccer school. We're just trying to keep up with them. And last week, the Tar Heels proved Smith right once again, winning the College Cup 1-0 over Wake Forest and ending a nightmarish 12-year national championship drought in women's soccer. UNC has won 22 of 43 of NCAA women's soccer titles ever, which is more than half if you're not a math major. No other women's soccer team has won more than 4. They also won the 1981 AIAW title, giving them 23 national titles in total. This was their 32nd College Cup appearance, including 5 of the last 7, and no other team has been in more than 14. But this is, I think, their most impressive win yet because legendary UNC coach Anson Dorrance retired just 4 days before the start of the season after 47 years of coaching. And Damon Nahas, who is the brother of North Carolina Courage head coach Sean Nahas, took over as interim coach. He was dealing with a very new squad. 21 of the players from the 2023 team transferred or turned pro or graduated. There were some reports of discontent, but Nahas kept the team together. And they upset their arch rivals Duke in the College Cup semis. And then the day of the national championship game, amid the Belichick frenzy, UNC athletic director Bubba Cunningham was spotted at the team hotel in Raleigh. And before the game, he told Nahas that he was removing the interim tag. Nahas didn't tell his players until after they won it all. It's a very cool moment. You should watch the viral video of that. And the Board of Trustees, which has the final say, did approve it on Monday. The final was a scrappy game. It was dominated by Wake Forest in the first half, but Olivia Thomas scored a beauty of a free kick to win the game in the 62nd minute. You have to go look up this goal. It's a stunner. So in honor of Olivia Thomas, Ben, what is your free kick of the day?
Well, it's mid-December, so let's talk about baseball. I can only ever be myself, but there is actually a topical, timely tie-in here, and this won't be exclusively about baseball. Today, I am going to bring you back to a momentous sports decision from exactly 50 years ago today. But I'm going to start with some much more recent history. The last few 9-figure free agent contracts signed by Major League Baseball players, namely Juan Soto, which we discussed last week, Max Fried, and Willy Adames, have had refreshingly simple structures. All 3 players received no trade clauses, Adames got a signing bonus, and Soto got a signing bonus and an opt-out that the Mets can void by boosting his salary, but there was no more complicated accounting required, by which I mostly mean there was no deferred compensation. These somewhat simple mega contracts notwithstanding, deferred payments have been a big talking point this offseason, so much so that to take you behind the hang-up curtain, for a while we have been discussing doing a segment on deferrals, and had actually decided to last week before that topic got bumped by the Soto signing, hence this substitute Afterball. One reason why deferred deals became contentious is that lately one team has been handing out a lot of them. The Los Angeles Dodgers didn't sign Soto, Fried, or Adames, which was very sporting of them. Every now and then they shared the free agent wealth, or I guess opt not to share owner Mark Walter's wealth with free agents, and other teams get a chance to acquire some stars. However, the Dodgers have baked deferred dollars into deals for Blake Snell, Tommy Edman, and Michael Conforto this winter, which continues a trend for the team, which now owes a little more than $1 billion in deferred payments from 2028 to 2046 to that trio, plus Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman, Will Smith, Teoscar Hernandez, and of course, Shohei Ohtani. It's easy to analyze, say, Fried's 8-year, $218 million deal with the Yankees, Divide 218 by 8, and you have his annual salary. Edman signed a 5-year, $74 million extension, which sounds simple enough, but between his signing bonus and his deferrals, the math gets as complicated as something from a sport with a salary cap. He got a $17 million signing bonus, a $5 million salary next year, and $12.25 million salaries in each of the following 4 years, of which $6.25 million per year is deferred. The deferred money for each year is paid out in 3 installments. So, for example, of the $6.25 million deferred from his 2026 salary, he'll get $2.5 million in 2035, another $2.5 million in 2036, and $1.25 million in 2037. The Dodgers will owe him his final $2.5 million payout, deferred from 2029 in 2044. So the present value of his $74 million contract is actually more like $65 million. And the average annual value for competitive balance tax purposes, which would be $14.8 million if you divided 74 by 5, is actually $13 million. Now, podcasters sometimes say that it's a bad idea to throw a bunch of numbers at people on a podcast, which kind of flies in the face of my whole career. But nonetheless, I wouldn't blame you if your head is spinning after those last sentences. This stuff is complicated. Complications create misperceptions, one of which is that the Dodgers are doing something unprecedented or underhanded here. Dodgers president of baseball operations Andrew Friedman recently addressed this, citing last December's $700 million Ohtani contract, 97% of which was deferred. I think the Shohei one was just very extreme, Friedman said, but if you set the Shohei contract aside, the rest are all within the norm and standard operating procedure that a lot of teams have done. But I think the Shohei one is just jarring to people because it's so different. And I think that the others just unfairly get lumped into that, but I think it's kind of a lazy narrative. I think Friedman is mostly right. For one thing, that contract structure, made possible by the massive endorsement deals that makes maximizing his yearly baseball salaries less vital to Ohtani, was Ohtani's idea, not the Dodgers. And he made the same proposal to teams other than LA. For another, the Dodgers still have to set aside that money every year in essentially an escrow account, so it's not as if they can do whatever they want with it in the meantime. Also, deferring money doesn't mean paying players less. It just means paying them later. It's not as if Ohtani could have had his $700 million over 10 years, and he just generously decided to stretch it over 20. If he had avoided deferrals, then that top-line number would have been a lot lower. More broadly, although LA has been the most aggressive team lately, no other team has more than $130 million some dollars deferred down the road. The Dodgers didn't invent the practice. None of this is new. Which brings me back to that 50th anniversary I promised I was going to get to. Half a century ago today, December 16th, 1974, A's pitcher Catfish Hunter, the reigning American League Cy Young winner, who had won one game and saved another in the A's World Series victory over the Dodgers, was declared a free agent based on a decision by arbitrator Peter Seitz. This was a prelude to the more famous Seitz decision, the one with a Wikipedia page, which came a year later and nullified the reserve clause that bound players to teams indefinitely, ushering in free agency. The Hunter decision wasn't so sweeping, but it did make Catfish the first modern free agent in the sport, and he soon signed a 5-year, $3.35 million deal with the Yankees, a huge raise from the 2-year, $200,000 deal he'd signed with the A's just a year earlier, a sign of the skyrocketing salaries to come. And why was Catfish freed halfway through that 1-year deal? It was not because he didn't actually exist. This is a different kind of catfish. Here's how the Associated Press put it. Catfish Hunter, baseball's leading pitcher, was declared a free agent today, and the Oakland A's were ordered to fulfill his contract and pay deferred compensation, emphasis added, including interest. Well. An AP story the next day noted, Hunter's 2-year contract, which totals $100,000 a year, provided for $50,000 a year in salary and another $50,000 in any way he wanted it. Seeking to avoid high taxes and also to provide himself an investment, Hunter asked Finley to deposit the second $50,000 in a deferred payment with a North Carolina insurance company. Another North Carolina mention for you, Lindsay. The story continued, Finley offered to pay the money, but reneged on giving it to the insurance company, claiming he could not write off such a payment on the team's tax returns. So cheapness is not a quality exclusive to current A's ownership, although Finley was eventually ordered to pay Hunter what he was owed. So, if you're wondering when in the modern history of free agency deferred compensation started, the answer is at the very beginning. And Hunter wasn't the only player who had such a deal. The AP reported this is a fairly common method used by high-salaried players to avoid paying high taxes. And it also said that the decision sent some owners scurrying to check any player contracts they might have with similar deferred payment provisions. Yet another AP story claimed Ted Williams was the first in baseball to get such a contract in the 50s, with $100,000 straight salary from the Red Sox and $50,000 to be paid over a period of years. I couldn't corroborate that, but I can confirm that baseball wasn't the biggest offender when it came to deferred deals. Starting several years before Hunter's, the American Basketball Association had made the most of the practice, and its players had made the least. As agent Ron Grinker said in Terry Pluto's classic book Loose Balls, the ABA was the first to start throwing around the big money. But the money wasn't really that big. It was paper money, annuities, the Dolgoff plan. The Dolgoff plan was the brainchild of Ralph Dolgoff, a former college basketball standout who went on to become the accountant who concocted an extreme scheme to lure players to the ABA by offering them seemingly enormous sums of money that were in fact so heavily deferred that they were worth a lot less. Jim Ard, for instance, signed a $1.4 million contract with the ABA's New York Nets, which actually called for him to be paid $250,000 over 4 years. Then the Nets agreed to put $8,000 a year for 10 years in a Dolgoff plan, an annuity that he would collect from ages 41 to 65. In 2005, Ard said, "That sounded all well and good given the financial forecast at the time of my signing, but the stock market took a horrible turn almost immediately after the ink had dried. The money was locked into some really bad investments, so bad that the plan was worthless by the time I was old enough to begin collecting. I went to court over the way the plan was constructed and eventually received a small settlement. It was nowhere near the $1.4 million face value of the contract." That was a common theme among ABA players, many of whom jumped back to the NBA before the leagues merged in '76. In the interim, those inflated figures drove an interleague bidding war. Grinker explained the ABA paid in paper money, but the NBA responded to that by paying in real dollars, and it nearly bankrupted both leagues. As baseball salaries exploded in the mid to late 70s after the advent of free agency, teams used deferrals to postpone the pain. Sparky Lyle was almost traded from the Rangers to the Phillies in '79, but that deal was scuttled because the teams couldn't agree on how to handle the $500,000 deferred deal that was supposed to be paid to him as his TV analyst salary for 10 years after he retired. Lyle was supposed to be swapped for Tug McGraw, who instead stayed in Philly and saved the last game of the 1980 Phillies World Series win. A 1981 New York story said baseball has the oddest and most complex contracts and included this quote, "In baseball, deferred income is fairly common," says Peter Rose, associate counsel for the MLB Players Association. Not that Pete Rose. The player, Pete Rose, did not have a deferred deal at the time, maybe because he had bets to place. But tons of other players of that era had deferred payments, and in some cases signing bonuses also. Gary Matthews, Ron Guidry, Vida Blue, Steve Stone, Reggie Jackson, Jim Rice, newly elected Hall of Famer Dave Parker. Most famously, Bruce Sutter in the 80s and Bobby Bonilla in the 90s got contracts from the Braves and Mets, respectively, that called for them to be paid into the 2020s in Sutter's case and until 2035 in Bobby Bo's case, which has led to the cherished tradition of Bobby Bonilla Day, which celebrates Bonilla's $1.19 million payout each July 1st. And I could list a lot of other stars who've had deferred dollars, including Roger Clemens, Ken Griffey Jr., Alex Rodriguez, Randy Johnson, Tom Glavine, Gary Sheffield, Jeff Bagwell, Barry Bonds, Mark McGuire, Mike Messina, Manny Ramirez, many modern-day Washington Nationals, including Max Scherzer, Patrick Corbin, and Steven Strasburg, and Rafael Devers, Chris Sale, Christian Yelich, Francisco Lindor, Edwin Diaz, Nolan Arenado, and JT Realmuto. The use of this tactic has fluctuated over time. A 2013 LA Times story said about 10 current Major League Baseball players have deferral clauses in their contracts, down from 50 a decade ago. What's interesting is that this hasn't really been common in other sports since the ABA debacle. That same 2013 story said that only one NHL player had deferred part of his deal at that time, as well as a few NFL players and fewer than 5% of NBA free agents. The 1981 Times story said no one has the same confidence in hockey teams as they do in baseball teams. And maybe the same was true of basketball teams. And of course, a cap makes deferrals harder to do. Other leagues have deferral restrictions on the books. The NFL CBA says no more than 50% of the player's salary up to and including a total of the first $2 million, and may provide for a deferral of no more than 75% of the player's salary in excess of $2 million. Whereas the NBA says deferrals can't exceed 25% of the player's salary. So it's still pretty common practice in baseball, even though owners don't like it. And a lot of owners have never liked it. They unanimously censured Ted Turner, Atlanta owner, back in the 80s when he handed out that Bruce Sutter deal. And the owners actually tried to place some restrictions or ban them entirely on deferrals in the most recent round of CBA negotiations. They tried to enter a clause that said for contracts entered into after the effective date of the basic agreement, deferred compensation of any kind will not be permitted. And players said, nope, we're not doing that. We're fine with deferred compensation because players get to brag about a big number. They and their agents can ensure that some money will still be coming in annually long after they retire. Meanwhile, a team like the Dodgers does it because they get to invest that money that they're forced to set aside. And in theory, they can turn that into more money than they could if they had to pay it out right away. As Friedman, a former investment banker and private equity guy, explained, a lot of our ownership group are from financial backgrounds and can have more than that money going to work right now. So, in short, okay, it's a little late for this to be short, but there's nothing new under the sun. And to quote Peter Pan in Battlestar Galactica, all of this has happened before, and it will all happen again. And when it does, people will probably be mad at the Dodgers. So, Alex, Lindsay, do you think other teams, if you can't outbid them with deferred dollars, then pony up yourself? Should other teams just be doing this more? Should other sports be doing this more? Should this be banned in baseball? What's the future of deferrals other than the fact that eventually, if the sport does not go bankrupt, they will be paid out?
Well, the Pittsburgh Pirates aren't going to give anybody deferred money or present day money.
No.
So I guess I can look at this as sort of an academic pursuit.
Yes.
I see no problem with a bit of financial engineering. This creativity, as you've just laid it out, seems totally fine to me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like it. It's too much math. Just make it stop.
Yeah, I'm with you on those grounds. Yeah, I'm good at some baseball math, but not so much when it comes to financial matters.
I think you're great at the baseball math.
Well, thank you for saying so, but my financial arrangements could probably tell you that this is not my strong suit.
Ben, all that I can say is that when it comes to baseball math, I will always defer to you.
Boo.
Let me live. We also have a bonus episode that is live right now about Travis Hunter's Heisman Trophy win and our still very limited understanding of how to evaluate two-way superstars in sports. To hear that, you can subscribe to Slate Plus on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free at the top of our show page or visit slate.com/hangupplus to get access wherever you listen. The episode is available right now, and we will see you over there. Our show notes are at slate.com/hangup, and you can email us at hangup@slate.com. Don't forget to follow the show, rate and review us on Apple Podcasts as well. Our producer is Kevin Bendis. For Ben Lindbergh and Lindsay Gibbs, I am Alex Kirshner. Remember Zelmo Beatty, and thank you for listening.